All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning. Sure to thank Mrs. Bracha Strimber for dedicating all the Shirman Drushos this month in loving memory of her husband, Avi Strimber, Avraham, ben Kálman, Eli'ezer, Halevi, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family in Nechama. We thank Avi Tobias for dedicating all the Shirman Drushos this month in appreciation for the Shir and out of love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's incredible Torah. So with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Yud Aleph, and we are picking up at the Mishnah. So Mishnah says as follows: Ose make legag, olemer pasas masehedot, avalo masuman. So let's just remember again, continuing along in the discussion regarding what one is allowed to do on Chalamayid. So the Mishnah says as follows: you're allowed to make a ma'akeh. Ma'akeh means a fence. Remember again, the Torah says, Kisivna bayis chadash va'asisa ma'akeh ligagecha. When you build a home, even if you're not building a home, you purchase a home, and you have a flat roof, and it is an area that people are technically able to use, one is obligated to go ahead and put up a fence around that roof. Why? Torah says, lest ki'ipal hanofel mimeno, lest chas v'shalom someone go ahead and fall off. So therefore, again, one is permitted to go ahead and make a ma'akeh for their gag. One is permitted to go ahead and make this fence. Ma'asehedot avalo ma'aseuman. So we've seen this distinction already. We saw this already by sewing, right? Ma'asehedot means one could make it in a, we'll call it an unprofessional manner. That's ma'asehedot, but not a ma'aseuman. One could not make, we'll call it a more expertly crafted fence for their roof. Similarly, shafenes hasdokin, one could go ahead and seal in cracks. So Rashi points out over here that we're talking about, Rashi says, shevet tanur. The person has an oven, and the oven develops a crack. So shafenes hasdokin, you can go ahead and, let's say, seal up the crack by smearing plaster on it. Uma'agilin osan b'ma'agila biyad uberegal avalo b'machaltzayim. So the wording over here is a little bit confusing. The Gemara picks up on this. So literally translated, it means as follows: you can go ahead and seal the crack in an oven that has a crack. B'ma'agila. I will say now, b'ma'agila literally means a roller, right? Biyad uberegal, with your hand and with your foot. Avalo b'machaltzayim, but not with a machaltzayim. Now I will say, now what's machaltzayim? Now look at Rashi. Eitz kein regal shedoch go b'ma'aziva listom hastokin. So it's very machatzayim was like a foot-shaped utensil. That when you were plastering something, you would kind of like pound the plaster into place. So we'll say, so the lashon here is a little bit confusing because the lashon sounds like you could use a roller, ma'agila, biyad uberegal, with your hand or with your foot, but not with your machaltzayim. Okay, so we'll define exactly what that means in the Gemara. Next. Hatzir v'hatzinor v'hakora v'hamira v'hamachteach shenishbaru. So we'll say these are all different parts of the door. The tzir is the pivot. The tzinor is the socket. The korah is the beam that goes across the door. Minol is a lock. Mafteach is a key. All of these are indispensable parts of the door's functioning. So what happens? Shnishbaru, let's say they broke. So what's the halacha? Metaknen b'moed. You're allowed to go ahead and fix it on Chalamayid. Ubilvad shali is kavin lasos malachta b'moed. That was interesting. As long as what? In other words, I will say all of these cases where you have a right to do malis malach on Chalamayid. This is all assuming that what? You couldn't do it before, right? In other words, that very simple case would be the door broke on Chalamayid. A crack developed in the oven on Chalamayid. But if any of these needs were already present before Chalamayid, and you decided, you know what, I'm not going to deal with it now. I have plenty of time over Chalamayid anyway, right? I'm not working my day job. So I purposely push off the task to Chalamayid. Then you're precluded from doing anything. Very important halacha. Only time that there's a dispensation from halacha on Chalamayid is when halacha l'mais you could not have done it beforehand. We'll say the Mishnah ends off by saying an interesting case: v'chol kivashin shehu yachol lachol mehen b'moed kovshan. So we'll say, listen to this. So kivashin means items which are pickled, right? Pickled, preserved. Look at Rashi. Kivashin shel tzir kilamar dagim ushar dvarim shekovshim b'melach. sheyachol la'ochlan b'moed, shelo yehi tzarech lahamtin ba'achilasan ad la'achra moed, sheyu nichbashin maru'in lechamad. This is very interesting. The Mishnah says, you could pickle items on Chol Hamoed as long as what? They'll be edible on Chol Hamoed. So we'll say, I guess there's different forms of pickling, but sometimes when you pickle something, again, it's essentially, it's interesting. It renders it inedible for some amount of time until you get to the end of the pickling process. So the Mishnah says over here, which is such an incredible metaphor for life also, that sometimes, again, there are processes you have to undertake, and until the process is complete, you will not be able to reap the benefits from that process. In fact, just the opposite. There's nothing to be gained from the process in the midst of the process. The only gain is when you reach the finish line. So again, where do we learn this from pickling? Right? So apparently, again, you pickle, the paradigmatic example the Mishnah is giving is fish. You pickle the fish. During the pickling process, the fish is inedible. Right? So the Mishnah says you could pickle whatever you want on Chol Hamoed, as long as it's going to be edible at some point in time on Chol Hamoed. Because to pickle something on Chol Hamoed, when what? When it's not going to be edible until after Chol Hamoed, so then again, I haven't really accomplished. In other words, I've done malach on Chol Hamoed with no Chol Hamoed benefit. And that one is not permitted to do. I'm sorry?
Probably that includes Yom Tov.
Yom Tov's all correct. So in other words, right, you'd be able to pickle on Chol Hamoed if you would get benefit on Yom Tov from it. Correct. Let me clarify that. You could pickle on Chol Hamoed as long as you're going to get some benefit from that over the course of Yom Tov. We will say you cannot pickle on Yom Tov. Right, pickling on Yom Tov you can't do. There's a whole discussion that which actually we'll see it's Gemara is going to get into, is because pickling resembles the tanning process. Because again, we'll say anything that involves large amounts of salt often has the appearance of tanning. So pickling often requires large amounts of salt. So you can't pickle on Yom Tov itself. You can pickle on Chol Hamoed as long as the result of the pickling will be available to you on Chol Hamoed or on Yom Tov as well. Thank you for that clarification. Both say good. Gemara, let's analyze. So both say, remember again, the first halacha in the Mishnah was you're allowed to go ahead and make a ma'akeh. You're allowed to make a fence for your rooftop on Chol Hamoed, but only what? Ma'aseh hedyot. Right? A simple fix, a non-professional fix. So I said, Rav Yosef Amar, Behutz of a Daphna. So Rav Yosef says, it just means a wall made out of branches. Hutz and Daphna, different types of branches. Or the other possibility is pile stones, but what? Don't plaster them. So the idea is, this is a temporary fix, right? So this will get you through Yom Tiv. You put up your branch wall, you put up your stones that are not plastered together, and ultimately, again, that will be enough. But I'll just say something very beautiful. Rabbi Yitzchak Berdichev says such a beautiful idea. He says on the pasuk V'asisa ma'akel gagecha that you should go ahead and make a fence. So the Rebbe says, what's the deeper message? What's the deeper message of having to build a fence? So the Torah says, kisifna bayis, when you will create a bayis, a home, v'asisa ma'akel gagecha, make a fence. So the Rebbe says, again, I'm giving you the condensed version. The Rebbe says that bayis represents a unit of accomplishment in life. Kisivna bayis. When you build something, when you build a home in life, when you accomplish something, when you do something of importance. So the Rebbe says human nature often is that when I accomplish something, I give myself a shkayach, and then I say, okay, I'm done. Good. I've built a bayis. I've done something of significance. Baruch Hashem. I've reached the finish line. I'm done. What does the Jew do as soon as he builds a bayis of accomplishment? Build more. Because remember again, the ma'akeh, the fence, extends above the home. So as soon as you finish building your bayis, as soon as you finish accomplishing something in life, there's only one question, which is, what's next? Keep building even on the rooftops of your accomplishments. The Rebbe. So we'll say, now listen to this. So the Mishnah said, you could go ahead and fill in the cracks of an oven, right? Uma'agilin osam magila. And Rabbi said, which means you could use a roller. So it says the Gemara, I don't understand. Now remember again, the next phrase in the Mishnah was, and you could do it biyad uberegel, with your hand and with your foot. Says Gemara, it doesn't make sense. Hashta b'magila amrit shari biyad uberegel mibai. But say if halacha l'maisa, I am permitted to go ahead and do it with a ma'agila. Right? If I'm permitted to go ahead and do it with a roller, does the Mishnah have to say I can do my hand and foot? No, Rabbi say a roller is a kli. Is it clear, right? So my hand and foot, that would be really what we'd call my sehedyot. So once I can do my hand and foot, why, I should say, once you tell me I can do it with a roller, why does the Mishnah see the need to tell me that I can do it with my hand and foot? To which the Gemara says, halchem, what it means to say, Shafen es hastokin u'ma'agilan osan ke'ein ma'agila biyad b'regel avalo machatzayim. Both say what it means is that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and fill in the cracks. And you can go ahead and what? And you can go ahead and, Look at Rashi. Shabbos said you can fill in the cracks in an oven, and you could smooth it out with your hand and with your foot, like you are using a roller. Can you use a roller? No. But what you can do is, Shabbos said, you might have thought that essentially when you go ahead and you fill in the cracks of the oven on chalamayit, you kind of could just, put the plaster in, but you can't smooth it out. Kamash on the Mishnah says you can smooth it out. You can smooth it out with your hand, you can smooth it out with your foot, but you can't smooth it out with a roller. Right? Ma'agila osa ke'ein ma'agila biyad uberegel avalo b'machal sayim, but not with the machal sayim. So we'll say essentially, you could smooth out the plaster, but you can't use a kli. You can't use a utensil. You can't use a ma'agila, which is a roller, and you can't use a machatzayim. We'll say, I don't know what the technical term is, but you have you see it sometimes when they lay dirt. They have this thing, what is it? Tamp. Okay, so it's a tamper. Is that what it's called? The kli? Good, right, I guess it's a tamp, right? So you can't use that. You can't use that. That's the machatzayim. So you can't use the ma'agila. You can't use the machatzayim. You can't use either of those items, but you can smooth out. Shabbos say something very interesting. You'll ask yourself, so why don't Chazal just say, go ahead and just put in the plaster and just don't smooth it out. Just don't smooth it out. I say something. There's such an interesting yesod here. It's not good in life to do sloppy work. It's not good to do sloppy work. It's not a good feeling to do sloppy work. It's not nice to look at sloppy work. Again, sloppy work is a reflection on the person who's doing it. And so Chazal don't want us, and this is such a yesod in life. We know both of you on this because things that we do sloppily or hastily, you look back at it, especially if it's stuff you have to look at, and it's embarrassing. It's not reflective of the true measure of what I can produce in life. So it's almost as if when you're filling in, your stove cracked, you have to fill it in. So the halacha really should have said, put the plaster in there, don't smooth it out at all, right? Just make it good enough to work and you'll fix it after Yom Tiv. Chazal said, listen, you can't use a kli, right? You can't use the ma'agila, you can't use the machatzayim, but you can smooth out the plaster with your hand or with your foot. Get in there. Make it look nice. Take pride in your work. If you're going to do something, then do it well. Incredible yesod. Simar goes weiter. So if any part of the door, right? So remember again, we've got the pivot, the socket, the board across the lintel, the lock, the key, anything that broke, you're allowed to go ahead and fix on Yom Tiv. Says the Gemara, or minhi, ad yamav hayapatish make b'Yerushalayim. Supposed to listen to this. The Gemara is already quoting the Mishnah by Yochanan Kohen Gadol. So we'll say Rashi actually quotes it. If you look at Rashi, Divrei HaMaschil ad yamav, it's almost right across and about 10 lines down. Ad yamav shal Yochanan Kohen Gadol hayapatish make b'Yerushalayim b'cholo shamoed. V'gazar alav ubitlo al ma'asar umasnisin katani umetakne min al maftech. So also, Mishnah says that up until the days of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, they used to hear the hammer banging on chalamayid in Yerushalayim. Yochanan Kohen Gadol came along and said, you can't use a hammer, you can't bang the hammer on chalamayid. So what says the Gemara says, ad yamav in mikan ve'elach lo kasha. So we'll say, how does our Mishnah allow you to fix doors? Fixing doors by definition requires a hammer. The Mishnah seems to indicate you can no longer use a hammer on Chalamayid. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Kam b'denafchi, kam b'denagri. It depends what kind of hammer. Yochanan Kohen Gadol went ahead and prohibited the use of the blacksmith's hammer. Why, says Rashi? Because when a blacksmith uses a hammer, he's usually hitting a hammer against what? Against metal. And it makes a lot of noise. That's when Yochanan Kohen Gadol says, no, that's not the right atmosphere for Chalamayid. The Mishnah is talking about a carpenter's hammer. And a carpenter's hammer makes much less noise. To which the Gemara says, come on. Maskef Rav Chisda, Yomru kala rabba asar kala zuta shari. So now you're going to tell me, if the hammer makes a lot of noise, it's asar. If it makes a little bit of noise, it's mutter. Come on. And who's deciding what's a lot of noise, what's a little bit of noise? It doesn't make any sense. Rather, Rav Chisda lo kashya, habemagli, habechatzini. Ultimately, again, the Gemara says, here's the distinction. One is talking about the magli. Both say magli is a large saw versus a chatzini, which is an axe. So apparently, the use of a large saw, which is what you would use for door repair, doesn't make noise. It doesn't make noise. Versus an axe, which absolutely does make noise in the process of chopping. Amra Papa, Papa gives another answer, simpler answer. Kan kotem gzera, kam acha gzera. Also, is a much easier answer. Our Mishnah is reflective of the time before Yochanan Kohen Gadol's Gzeira. So our Mishnah indicates that you could use tools, right, hammers, to go ahead and fix the door. This is an earlier Mishnah. The later Mishnah, ultimately, again, of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, says that you cannot. Rav says, how Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi? Two different opinions. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. So we'll say one opinion is Rabbi Yehuda and one opinion is Rabbi Yossi. Now listen to this. Dam Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Man tana shinui b'moed b'davara avid. Right? We'll say, who is the opinion who says that even when you have a davara avid, even when you're going to have a loss, you have to perform the malacha with a shinui? The lo Rabbi Yossi. It is not reflective of the view of Rabbi Yossi. Now, we'll say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. How Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Bepirka de Lakamana, we'll see this in tomorrow's daf, actually. The Rabbi Yossi, lo bay l'shanuyi l'davar ha'avid, umasnisin deshari hacha kolhani below shinui Rabbi Yossi. We'll say, we're going to see an interesting machlokes in tomorrow's daf, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Namely, when you have a davar ha'avid, which is how we started this Masechta, right? You have the potential to suffer a loss. Right? And now, halacha l'maisa, again, you're allowed to do malacha to save yourself from that loss. What's the shaila? The shaila is, do I have to perform the malacha with the shinui when saving myself from that loss? Rabbi Yehuda says yes. Rabbi Yossi says no. Our Mishnah Rabbi say reflects whose view? Rabbi Yossi. Because what did the Mishnah say? If your door is broken, Rabbi say now, not fixing your door is what? A davra avid. Right? That's a loss, right? To not fix your door. Potential loss, significant loss, not to fix your door. The Mishnah says, how do you repair the door? In a normal fashion. That reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi, who says that when it comes to a davara avid, you do not have to go ahead and use a shinui. So the Gemara says, Am Ravina Keman Madlina Idna Kabiyusa Dedasha Becholo Demoda. According to whom today can we go ahead and fix a doorpost? Right? Little Kabiyusa Dedasha. Kabiyusa Dedasha. Ultimately, again, Rashi says over here, when the nails from the doorpost come out, who are we able to fix them according to today without a shinui? Ultimately, again, Rabbi Yossi. Good. So we'll say three different ways to reconcile the apparent stira. Beautiful. Kvashin sheyachala alecha moy kavshin. So in the last case, the Mishnah was pickling, right? So you can engage in the process of pickling as long as what? Whatever you're pickling will be edible at some point in time over Chalamayid or the last days of Yom Tiv. Right? Good. So it says the Gemara, just listen to this case. Badisa lebai kavri. So we'll say, now this is shorthand for the following. Look at Rashi. Badisa is the name of a river. Levai is the name of a place. So the river Badisa in the city of Levai dried up. Now, again, there's a whole discussion here in the Maharsha about how it dried up. Did they drain it? It doesn't really matter for our purposes. The point over here is it dried up. Now, both say, now what happens when a river dries up? What happens when a river dries up? There's a whole bunch of available fish. So what happens? Kavri. There was a lot of fish. Azil kuli alma. Sud. So everybody came to collect fish. Right? Baruch Hashem, everybody came to collect fish. Aisu kavra. Right? They got the fish. Aisu kavra. Shabbos says, now here's the issue. Everybody has now got a lot of fish at home. Says the Gemara, Shara lehu rava, Lemimlach minayhu. So Rava allowed them to salt the fish. Now Rashi says, Lemimlach harbe. Rava allowed them to salt the fish, but it's a heavy salting. We'll say, because obviously they bring home a lot of fish. That means what? They don't plan on eating it all now. When you plan on preserving something, especially again for a longer time, there's a lot of salt on it. And that fish is not going to be edible for some amount of time. So it seems to you that Rava allowed them to salt the fish, even though knowing that what? It's not going to be edible over Chalamayid or Yom Tiv. So Amrli Abaye said, one second, V'hatnan, Kivashin Shuyachal Lechem and Moed Kovshan. So but Abaye said to Rava, but Rava, the Mishnah is saying only not to salt things on Chalamayid. If halacha l'maisa, again, it's going to be edible at some point in time over Chalamayid. Amrli Kevan Dimeikara, Adaita da'achila aisinu. So ultimately, we'll say here's what Rava's logic. You see, when everybody brought the fish home, we'll say what was their intention? To eat it. To eat it. That was the intention. And to eat it when? To eat it on Yom Tiv. Right now, Baruch Hashem, enough to cook for the rest of Yom Tiv. We have to cook, but at least we have all the fish we need for the rest of Yom Tiv. Then what happened? They brought home the fish. People realized, wow, there's a lot more fish than what I need for Yom Tiv. Vishavik luhu pasti. And if we just go ahead and don't do anything, they're going to suffer a loss. Keprakmatya ha'avid shdami vishari. But listen to this. So Rava said, once everybody brought home the fish with the intention to eat it over Yom Tiv, they then realized that what? They had too much fish for Yom Tiv. So Rava says, if we don't allow them to salt it, then it becomes like what? A davra avid. A davra avid. It becomes like any other merchandise that which some person has suffered loss. And what have we learned already? That halacha l'maisa, one is permitted to do malacha for the sake of a davar ha'avid. Interesting. Bika da'amri, others say, shari luhu rava, meitzad mezel, aisuye umimlach. We're both in a little bit of a different version. A little bit of different version. So the Gemara says, Rava gave them the heter sharlu Rava meitzad mezel aisuye umimlach. Rava gave them the permission to go ahead and proactively get the fish and ultimately again bring it back and salt it. Now, Bosai. Now listen, in that case, see, in the first version of the story, the people, if you notice again, people went, they first got the fish, right? The Lashon is over here. Azle kule almat sad, aisu kavra. So they got the fish, right? They got the fish. They brought it home. Once they brought it home, Rava permitted them to salt it, right? So in that version, and Abaye says, but how could they do that? So Rava says it's a davra of it. In the second version, Rabbi said this is very interesting. In the second version, Sharlu Rava meitzad meiza. Rava says, go out, get the fish, bring it home, and salt it. So in the second version, Rava is proactively telling them, get as much as you want, and you could salt it. I'm really Abai v'hanan kivashin shiyachal ochlam and kovshan. So we'll say, but once again, Abai says, I don't say, Rabbi, how can you do that? This is even worse. You're allowing them to go get the fish, knowing that what? They're not going to eat it over Chalamayid or Yom Tiv, and you're allowing them to salt it. How you let? So Amar lei hani nami misachli agav itzitza. Oh, they will say, watch this. Rava says, let me teach you a little trick. Even when you heavily salt fish and it's not currently edible, if you squeeze the fish, essentially you squeeze the brine out of the fish, you could render it edible. So Rabbi say, even fish that's heavily salted, that is quote unquote like inedible as it is, can be rendered edible very easily just by squeezing out the pickling solution, by squeezing out the brine. Therefore, again, essentially what Rav is saying is, there's no such thing as an inedible fish. Rabbi said the whole issue of going ahead and pickling is that you're rendering something inedible and unusable for the duration of Chalamayid and last day's Yom Tiv. To which Rabbi says to Abaye, nothing's inedible. It just has to be squeezed. And once you squeeze it, ultimately it's fine. So the Gemara Bosai talks about this a little bit. Kiyad Shmuel, like Shmuel for example, of dulei shisin itzitzi va'achal. They brought Shmuel a fish that was pickled. He went ahead and he squeezed it 60 times and he ate it. And we'll say now, what Rashi says, 60 could be literally 60 or 60 could just mean more than twice, right? In other words, that you have to squeeze it a little bit. In other words, it takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of effort, but you could go ahead and get all of the brine out. Rava ikla l'beirei shkalusa. Rava went to the house of the shkalusa. Avdile shisin itzitziva achal. Same thing. They brought before him a pickled fish. He squeezed it, or they squeezed it 60 times, and he ate it. Rav Ekalabe, Rav Shapir. Rav went to the house of Rav Shapir. Aisu l'kamei. Listen to this. Kavra. They brought him a fish. Let's listen to this fish. Tilsa bishula. 1/3 of the fish was cooked. Tilsa milcha. 1/3 of the fish was salted. Vitilsa tavya. And 1/3 of the fish was broiled. What a delicacy, right? Whole fish. We eat each third of it prepared in a different way. Amarav. So Rav said, Amarli adat saida. Now, once we're talking about fish, we digress a little bit to speak about other issues related to fish. So Amarav, Amarli adat saida. Adat saida said to me, Kavra. So we'll say. I'll just point out over here, just to understand that halacha lemaisa. The pickling is as stated in the Mishnah. Namely, you could pickle on Yom. You could pickle on Chal. You can't pickle on Yom Tiv, because pickling on Yom Tiv resembles the malacha of tanning, and therefore it can't be done. You could pickle on Chalamayid as long as what? As long as what? The food is edible over Chalamayid or last day's Yom Tiv. And I will say, edible can mean one of two things. Edible can mean the pickling process will be done, and therefore you'll be able to eat it, or squeezing. If you can squeeze out the brine and eat the food, that's fine as well. Good. We'll say some other culinary tips over here. Samar Rav Amrli Adatzaida. Kavra samuch lemisriche ma'ale. Fish is best right before it's about to spoil. Things have changed, right? Things have changed. That's clear. I'll say, but again, it is interesting. In other words, I'll say, you see, you can say something isn't true now, but it was true then. And it's just interesting. Whatever the mitzvah is, maybe it's a certain type of fish. Whatever it is, fish is good right before it goes bad. Ada the hunter told me, or the fisherman told me, Kavra tav. Listen to this. He says, here's the best way to prepare fish. Kavra tavye ba'achuha. So I will say the first thing you should do is go ahead and roast it, right? Roast it in its brother, right? So I will say what's its brother? Rashi says is melach, is salt, right? Now why is salt the brother of fish? Because both of them are in the water together, right? So they're in the water. So right, go ahead and roast it in its brother. Askuye ba'avua, then put it in its father, right? After you go ahead and you roast it in its brother in salt, put it in its father. What's the father? The father is water. Right? Put it in its father in water. Rashi says, after you roast it, so roast the fish and its brother in salt, then put it in its father, which is cold water. Michle bibre, go ahead and eat it with its son. Right? Now we'll say, now what's its son? Rashi says, eat it in its own brine, in its own gravy. Right? Eat it in the gravy that comes out of it. So roast it in its brother's salt. After you roast it, dip it in its father cold water, and then when you eat it together with its son, with its own gravy. Okay? Ishti ale avua. And drink it with its father. In other words, drink this type of fish with water. With water. Vermavashi. Amr li adat saida. Ada the fisherman told me, Kavra tachli v'chalba. If you're eating fish, cress, and milk, liton, that was like, I guess that was like a normal type of meal. Fish, cress, and milk. Liton gufa v'lo liton puria. Don't go to sleep after eating that. In other words, a person should have some type of physical activity, or you shouldn't go to sleep after eating a meal like that, but you should have some type of activity after going ahead and eating that meal. Similarly, again, if you're eating cress, milk, and fish, cress and milk, drink water. Whatever you do, don't drink beer. And if you have to drink some alcoholic beverage, the Gemara says, shichra v'lo chamra. Better to drink beer and not wine. Beautiful. Beautiful. Plus, I just point out something amazing. Sometimes you wonder to yourself, like, why does the Gemara need to include this? Well, there's something very beautiful about it. That, hafach ba v'hafach ba dekula ba, like the Gemara says. Literally, turn it over, for everything is in it. Everything we need to know in life is really in Torah. It really is. And sometimes we think that Torah kind of only addresses the lofty levels, right? Only addresses, the esoteric. And it's not true. The beautiful part is that Torah Kedosha teaches us how to live how to be successful and how to be safe, right, in all of our areas of life. Everything we need, Rabosai, is here. Hadron alach, mashkin beis hashalchin. Rabosai, mazel tov upon completing the first parak of Moed Katan. Mazel tov, mazel tov. Rabosai, now we come to the second parak. Rabosai, now, I'll just tell you something very interesting. The second parak is going to continue with many of the same themes of the first parak, namely what you're allowed to do on Chalamai, what you're not allowed to do. But Rabosai, the second parak of Moed Katan is also the source for Hilchos Avelos. So any of the halachos concerning mourning, right? Pretty much all of the halachos concerning mourning, most of the halachos, the majority of halachos concerning mourning are going to be seen in this parak of Moed Katan. So it's really a fascinating study in halacha l'mayis as well. So here I go, Bosai. Misha hafach zesav veiru eva. So Bosai, here's the case. Just a very quick olive production 101, right? You go ahead and you have olives, right? You pick them off the tree, you put them in a vat. The way it works, I will say, is you allow olives to soften a little bit in the vat, and then you turn them over. Once you turn them over, you have to press them relatively quickly, and if you don't, the olives rot. The olives rot. So once you turn over the olives, the next step is you're bringing in really just a board, a very heavy board. You put that on top of the olives, that's the first squeeze. What comes out of the olives after that first squeeze? That's what we call virgin olive oil. Virgin olive oil is the oil that comes out of the first squeeze of the olives. After that, you still get more oil, but it's not virgin oil. So therefore, here's the case. Misha hafach hazesa. So here's the case, I will say. A person will call Reuven. Reuven turned over his olives. Ve'iru evel. And what happens? Chas v'shalom, he now went into avelos, which means, he lost one of the 7 close relatives. A mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, spouse. Now he's in avelos. So it says we're going to see a person in Avelos is not permitted to do malacha. Now, not malacha per se, like Shabbos malacha, but is not permitted to do work. Not permitted to do work. So what happens? He turned over his olives and now became an avel, ones, or some other extenuating circumstance occurred. Now Rashi says over here, ones, hainu milsachri, sikolomar mishavak azesav lefnei ragel, v'iru ones. Now both say, now the ones case is like this. The ones case is, I turned over my olives Erev Yamtiv. Right? With every intention of doing what? Of pressing them when? Before Yamtiv. Then what happens? Chas v'shalom, there was a meis mitzvah. Right? Somebody died, no one to bury them, I have to go do the levaya. And therefore what happens? I never got a chance to press the olives before Yamtiv. What's the halacha? Oh, shetu a Poland. Or Rabbi say, I hired workers also on Erev Yamtiv. And what happens? They didn't show up. It happens, right? This is mamish like maisim b'chol yom. You know what happens? They got their stimulus check right before they were about to show up. So why should I do this? Right? Why should I do this? So they go ahead and they don't show up. They didn't show up right before Yom. So we'll say, so again, there's 3 cases here, right? Case number one is Avelos. So again, this case, now we'll say, the Avelos case has nothing to do with Chalamai, with Yom Tif, right? The Avelos case was, Reuven's ready to go ahead and press his olives. Then Chas v'Shalom, he's plunged into Avelos. Now he can't do Malach. Okay, that's case 1. Case 2 is Erev Yom Tiv, I'm ready to press my olives. Then there's a Meis Mitzvah, I have to go take care of that. I never get a chance to press it. Or again, along the same lines is, I hired workers, my workers never showed up. In the last 2 cases, there was an extenuating circumstance, precluded me from doing this malacha before Chalamayid, but before Yom Tiv. Now it's Chalamayid, what can I do? So what's the halacha? Toin kol rishon manichal achar hamoed. But say the halacha is on Chalamayid, I can do the first press. So I'll say, what can I do on Chalamayid? I can go ahead and put the board on top of the olives, but the rest I have to leave until after Yom Tov. In other words, we'll say, according to Rabbi Huda says that Allah Chalamaisa, essentially on Chalamayid, I'm allowed to do malacha for the sake of davar ha'avid. Now we'll say, what's the real davar ha'avid? What's the real loss over here? The real loss is if I don't do the initial squeeze, the initial press. Right? If I don't do the initial press now and I leave it till after Yom Tov, those olives are going to rot. Once I do the initial press, everything else could wait till after Yom Tov. So if Rabbi Huda says, on Chalamayid, I could take the big wooden beam or big wooden thing, put it on top of the olives, and let it sit there. That way, again, the first press has been done. the virgin olive oil extracted, I can leave, and I have to leave everything else until after Yom Tov. Rabbi Yossi says no. Zoleif v'gomer v'gaf kidar. Rabbi Yossi will explain all of those terms in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi says something very interesting. Essentially, once you have the license to what? To do the first press, you have the license to do everything. In other words, Rabbi Yossi says, once you were not negligent. See, Rabbi Yossi, remember again, the case here is a very specific one. I really had in mind to do things correctly. Circumstances beyond my control precluded me from pressing those olives. Rabbi Yossi says, once you have the heter to do the first press, pretty much we give you the heter to finish it up. So whatever you need to do over Chalamayid to finish up this press, you are permitted to go ahead and do so. Good. Rabbi Yossi, let's go back there. Says the Gemara, Pasach be'eva v'siyam Moed. Rabbi Yossi, here's what's interesting. If you notice, by the way, the Mishnah began with a discussion of Avelos, but then very quickly transitioned to a discussion about what? About Chalamayid. So Rabbi says, here's what's interesting, and I want to point out the Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi is on Chalamayid. It's not about Avelos. So what's the halacha about Avelos? In other words, Rabbi say, here's what I know. I know that if I set up my olives for that first press on Erev Yom Tov, and then what happened? Chas v'shalom, I had to go take care of a Meis Mitzvah, never had a chance to do the press. I know that, what can I do on Chalamayid? I know at least what can I do on Chalamayid? I could do the first press. Right? Okay, Rabbi Yossi will say you could do everything. Fine, but I know at least I could do the first press. What I don't know is what could I do in Avelos. In other words, what happens, I will say, in case number one, Reuven is about to go ahead and press his olives. He then, chas v'shalom, becomes an Avel. An Avel is not allowed to do malacha. Rabbi say, now, we don't know why an Avel is not allowed to do malacha, but from the Mishnah it's clear that he can't. We'll learn why. So now, what does the Avel do? What is the Avel allowed to do? I don't know that from the Mishnah. So I'll say, watch this. So the Gemara says, I'm going to have Shisha Beid Ravidi. Here we go. Zosel Meres, Devarim Hamutarim Bemoed Asurim Evlo. So also Shisha Bar Idi says, do you know what this teaches us? It teaches us that halacha l'maisa, things that are permitted during Chalamayid are not permitted during Avelos. Which means, Rabbi say, if Reuben were to set up his olives ready for the first press, and then he becomes an Avel, what is he allowed to do over the course of Avelos? Nothing, which means total loss. There is no heter for davar ha'avid during Avelos. So Rav Shisha, this is the opinion of Rav Shisha Beid Ravidi. The fact that the Mishnah begins with Avelos and then quickly transitions to Chalamayid and only gives a solution for Chalamayid tells us there is no solution during Avelos. No solution. So you set up the olives right before Avelos, then you become an Avel. There's nothing you could do, right? Unfortunately, the olives are just going to be total loss. That's what Shishri Ravidi. So the Gemara says, Rav Ashi Amar, Lomi Bai Kamar. No, Rav Ashi says, no. That's not how you read the Mishnah. Lomi Bai Me Avlo de Midrabanu B'Shari, Ela Afilu B'Moed Yisur Melach Medaraisa, B'Makom Peseda Shaban. Rav Ashi says, no. That's not how you read the Mishnah. The way you read the Mishnah, I'll say is like this. Let's analyze. The Isser to do Malacha during Avelos. And I will say, now we don't know that there is an Isser to do Malacha, but let's presuppose there is an Isser to do Malacha. At most, it is what? Dirabanan. The Isser to do Malacha and Chalamayid, although Abba said we've never actually seen, we're going to do this sugya, is Da'oraisa. So what the Gemara, so comes along Rav Ashi says like this, here's what the Mishnah is telling you. If there is a heter to do Malacha on Chalamayid for a davar ha'avid, even though Malacha on Chalamayid is an Isser Da'oraisa, then all the more so what? There is a heter to do Malacha during Avelos for a davar ha'avid, because Avelos is only Dirabanan. So I will say, this is absolutely wild. You hear this machlokes? Machlokes of Shisha Beid Ravidi and Rav Ashi how to read the Mishnah. Because we'll say, what everybody agrees with is like this. The Mishnah just reads strangely. Right? The Mishnah begins with the case of Avelos. Right? Reuven is about to press his olives. Then he's plunged into Avelos. We never even thought. Then the Mishnah transitions to Chalamayid. It goes into machlokes. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Chalamayid. So what's the halacha by Avelos? Rav Shisha Beid Ravidi, the Mishnah doesn't give you a solution by Avelos. Do you know why? Because there is no solution by Avelos. By Avelos, if you have a davar ha'avid, sorry, there's the loss. That's it. There is no license for davar ha'avid by Avelos. Rav Ashi says, what are you talking about? Just the opposite. The Mishnah doesn't have to explicitly address Avelos, because once the Mishnah tells me that there is a heter for Davar Ha'avid by Chalamayid, and Chalamayid is an Isra Malacha Da'oraisa, but you can still do Malacha V'tzorech Davar Ha'avid, then Alachas Kama V'Kama, all the more so, you are permitted to go ahead and do Malacha during Avelos for a Davar Ha'avid, because that is only a Dirabanan. Incredible machlokes, Rabbi say. So again, we're left with the machlokes over here about what he did during Avelos. Do you have to suffer a total loss? Right? Is it a total loss? Or is malacha for the sake of a davra avid mutter? No. That's what I said before. There are two different cases. The case of Avelos is not Yom Tiv. The case of Avelos is its own case of Avelos, right? So nothing to do with Yom Tiv. Reuven is minding his own business, right? Not Yom Tiv. He's doing his stuff, and then he becomes an Avel. Nothing to do with Yom Tiv. Then second case is the case of Yom Tiv. I'm sorry, thank you. Let me clarify this one for both sides. So remember again, the case of Avelos is not the pshat that he became an Avel, then it's Yom Tiv, now it's Chalamayid. The case of Avelos is nothing to do with Yom Tiv. Reuven turned over his olives, he's ready to press them, he becomes an Avel on a random Tuesday. On a random Tuesday, Yom Tiv is nowhere in sight, it's Cheshvan. It's Cheshvan. There's not a Yom Tiv for miles, right? Right? So nothing going on over here. So now the shaila is during Avelos, what could he do? And this one makes the Mishnah confusing, because then the Mishnah kind of drops that, and just begins discussing Chalamayid. So first of all, it could lead you to think that we're talking about a case of Avelos, which goes into Chalamayid, which then, as Maish said correctly, there's no Avelos during Chalamayid, because Yom Tiv cancels out Avelos. And then furthermore, so say we have this machlokes. So we have Rav Shisha Reid Ravidi and Rav Ashi. Rav Shisha Reid Ravidi telling us that on Chalamayid, so we'll say on Avelos, so it turns out, according to Rav Shisha Reid Ravidi, Avelos is more Chomer than Chalamayid. Right? On Chalamayid, you're allowed to do malacha for the sake of a davara avid, but on Avelos, no heter malacha even for a davara avid. Rav Ashi says absolutely not. Chalamayid is more chamer than Avelos, and if on Chalamayid you could do malacha for the sake of a davar ha'avid, then all the more so you could do so on Avelos as well. So I'll say, here we go. Tanya Kavase Rav Shisha Reid Ravidi. You have a Bryce that's for Shisha Reid Ravidi. Here we go. Elu dvarna osin la'avel. Bimei Avlav. So we'll say, remember again, Shisha Reid Ravidi said that halacha l'maisa, an Avel is not permitted to do any malacha over the sake of his Avelos, even if it is a davar ha'avid. So the Gemara wants to quote a brisa that supports Shisha Reid Ravidi. Here we go. Elu dvarim ha'osin la'avel bimei avlo. So we'll say, these are the things that we could do for an Avel while he is in Avelos. So we'll say, now what's striking about this lashon? Other people can do it. In other words, both say the Bryce is saying, an Avel, what can an Avel do in terms of malacha? Work? Nothing. But his friends could do stuff for him to stave off a loss. For example, Zeisef hafuchin toanilo, if he turned over his olives before he became an Avel and didn't yet get a chance to press them, they could press them for him. Vikado laguf, similarly again, if he had barrels of wine to seal, and he didn't get a chance to do it, his friends could do it. Peshtar lalos min hamishra, he was soaking flax, they could pull the flax out of the water. Simra lalos min hayora, he was dyeing wool, they could pull the wool out. Umar bitzim sadehu, they could go out and water his field, literally means sprinkle his field. Mishetagia onas hamayim shalom, when it's time to be sprinkled. So again, the Brisa clearly indicates that the Avel himself is not permitted to do anything. Now the common denominator amongst all of these cases that were just mentioned is they are all a davar ha'avid. These are all examples of things that if you don't take care of them now, there's going to be a total loss. Everyone knows, you leave flax in the water too long, done. You don't water the field at the right time, done. You don't pull the wool out of the dye in enough, again. So these are all examples of davar ha'avid, and the Brisa clearly indicates the friends of the Avel. Friends of the Avel can go ahead and do this for him. Rabbi Huda says, Av Zorno Sadanir, Visado Amedas Lepishtan. You could even go ahead, and Rabbi Huda says even further, if the Avel plowed his field before he became an Avel, they could plant the field for him, right? Or again, if he has a field that is supposed to be planted with flax, which I guess has a much smaller window, they can go ahead and plant that for him. Amrullah, they said to Rabbi Huda, no, that we don't agree with. You know, if he doesn't plant the field now, plant the field later. If he doesn't plant flax, he'll plant a different crop. So we'll say, they argue Rabbi Huda, they say, Rabbi Huda, no. The only thing you could do for an Avel is what? Davra Avid. But anything that's not a davara of it, you can't do for him. I will say, but again, at the end of the day, you see that halacha lemaisa, the avel can't do anything himself, even for a davara of it. At most, his friends have a license to act on his behalf, supporting the position of Rav Shisha Breid Rav Idi. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Zeisav hafuchin ve'ein sham uman elohu. So listen to this. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, what about the following case? What happens, Rabbi say, in the case, same case, Reuven turned over his olives, they're ready to be pressed. Then, Rahman al-Islam, he became an avel, right? He became a mourner. So now what happens? Ideally, his friends are going to take care of it. Let's say there's no one else who knows how to do it. There's no one else who knows how to do it, right? Zeisaf afuk, and so the olives have been turned over. Ve'ein sham uman elohu. There's no other expert who knows how to do it. There's no expert. There's no one else who knows how to do this. Right? Kado lago ve'ein sham uman elohu. Or he has to seal his barrels of wine. There's no one else except the avel. Pishtano lalos min ha-mishra v'tzaro lalos min ha-yora ve'ein sham uman elohu. So Rabbi Shimon says, but what happens? What happens if there is no one else? There's no one else to pull out the flax. There's no one else to pull out the wool. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, Harizeh ya'aseh b'tzina. The avel can do it, but he has to do it privately. So Rabbi say, this is quite fascinating. So what you begin to see over here is like the evolution of Hilchas Avelos. So Rabbi say, so on one end of the spectrum you have Rav Shisha Breid Rav Idi. Rav Shisha Breid Rav Idi says that what? An avel can't do any malacha during his avelos, even for a davara ovid. Ultimately, again, then the Bracha says that Allah Chalamaisa, that other people could take care of the malacha for an avel, for a davara ovid. Then Rabbi Shimon Gamliel saying the truth is other people could do it. But if it's a total loss, a real significant loss, and there's no one else to take care of it besides the avel can do it. But what? Rabbi say, but what? Bitsina. Bitsina means what? Privately. Rabbi said, we're going to see that in Hilchos Avelos, this is a very, very important halacha. Because the truth is, we paskin that, we'll discuss this halacha, but an avel is not permitted to do work. It's very important. A person's chashem saying shiva, you're not permitted to go ahead and run the affairs of your office or things like that. But what about things that have to get done? So first of all, again, it could have other people do it. This bitsina idea is very important because also there are circumstances where, let's say a person, a person's running a business and they're about to seal a deal, right? Close a deal that only they can handle. You could have a situation like this, right? Only I can do this. I've been negotiating. No one else knows the intricacies, don't know the parties. So I will say there are heterim over the course of Shiva to be able to take care of certain business needs under certain circumstances we'll discuss, but it's always bitsina. It always has to be done in a private fashion. We'll discuss these halachas. Yes, Rakim. Out of Shingul Miel, say second wide line. Further, Shingul Miel said, Im haya uman l'rabin. Listen to this case. I will say, let's say you are a craftsman who provides a service for the rabbin, the sapar, or you're the barber, right? You are the barber. You're the town barber, or balan. You run the bathhouse, right? V'higia eis haregel, ve'ein sham uman elohu. So I'll say, let's say again, you're the town barber, or you run the bathhouse, or you provide some other service that only you provide. And now Yom Tiv is coming, and the town needs you. Hareze yaseh. Then I will say, ultimately again, you're permitted to do the malacha. I will say, which is an incredible yisod, which teaches you what? The needs of the collective always outweigh the needs of the individual. I will say this is an incredibly important yisod. What I need is important, but it's not as important as to what the collective needs. And I will say this is such an incredible yisod. It's very, I think, very countercultural, right? Because very often in today's society, the needs of the individual outweigh the collective, right? What I want, what I need is important, and even if it's not good for you, or inappropriate for you, or inconveniencing you, you have no right to tell me that my needs are not important. And that's ridiculous, because first of all, you can't run a functional society like that, as we're beginning to see. He'll say, but at the end of the day, individual needs are very important, but they're not as important as the collective. Right? It's all about the klal. It's all about the rabbin. So it's incredible. Ruvain, this guy, he's in Avelos. He's sitting Shiva. He's the only barber in town. What is he going to be doing during Shiva as Yom Tov approaches? He's giving haircuts. Why? Because the rabbin needs you. the rabbim need you. And if the rabbim need you, then you have an absolute obligation to set aside your own needs and to be there for the rabbim. It's so incredible. So we'll say, the Gemara gives some more examples of this. Ha'arisin v'ha'chakirin v'ha'kablonin. So I will say, listen to this. If you look at Rashi, it's just interesting. Rashi, we'll say in the wide lines of Rashi, 3 lines down. And Aris also we translate as a sharecropper. Sharecropper are mekable asodos l'shnayim l'shlish l'reviyah. So we'll say a sharecropper is a person who plows someone else's field and takes a percentage of the proceeds. Right? So if it's a good year, he'll make a lot of money. Not a good year, doesn't make a lot of money. Whatever the crop is, he takes a portion. Chakirim, Rashi says, Shekiva l'shmir la'avdol l'sikum kach v'kach korin ani nosin l'cham mimena. So I'll say, so Chakirin is someone who also leases a field, right? We'll call her a lesser, right? Or, right, who goes in and leases the field. He agrees to pay the owner a set amount. Right? So he pays a set amount. So we'll say, as opposed to the sharecropper, who will take a portion of the crop as his proceeds. The Chakirin, the Chachir, he goes ahead and pays the owner a set amount. So whatever the yield of the field is, I'm going to pay you 5 kor. That's what I'm paying you for the year. Or kablonin. So we'll say a kablon ultimately again is shekiblu l'shomer l'zman ploni besikum kach v'kach binyes. So we'll say a kablon on the other hand is not paying in produce. A kablon is paying a certain amount. Right? I'm paying you $500 a year for this. So we'll say, so these are all different types of arrangements for fields. So we'll say, now watch this. Hare elu yasu achirim b'shvilan. So we'll say, let's say again, one of these people, the sharecropper, the chachir, the kablon, becomes an avel. Who could work the field? Now they can't work the field themselves. What can they have done? They could have someone else work the field on their behalf. So we'll say it's very important. The isra malacha on an avel is only on him himself. But there's absolutely no problem having someone else run his business for him during the days of Avelos. Ha-chamarin, ha-gamolin, v'ha-saponin, hare-elu lo yasu. So let's listen to this. So look at Rashi. Rashi says, over here, ha-gamolin ha-saponim, hare-elu lo yasu. Rashi says, lo yaskiru lachatchila lefi shamalacha shalahemhu. So we'll say, these are people ultimately, again, who go ahead and they should not go ahead and rent out. Gamalin, Chamar, Sapanin. So again, Chamarin are donkey owners. Gamalin are, donkey, camels, sailor ships. Hara'elu lo yasu. Vim hayu muchrachin o muskarin eitz lachirin. If their items, right, their donkeys, their camels, their boats, were leased out by to others, eitz lachirim, hara'elu yasu. So we'll say, interestingly enough, one is a case of leasing versus one is a case where they're leased out. So let's say, I leased out my donkey, my camel, my boat to someone else. If I don't show up for work, then what happens? They suffer a loss. So the idea is, if I'm going to be the one who suffers a loss, I have to deal with the loss. But I can't cause someone else to suffer a loss as a result, ultimately, again, of my not showing up for work. Look at Rashi. So let's listen to this. Same idea, by the way. So we'll say, so again, if I'm the one who's going ahead, I rented the donkeys, the camels, the boats, I shouldn't do any work over the course of my avelos. I should take the loss. But if I own these and I was rented out to someone else for work, I cannot abstain from showing up to work, because if I do so, forget about my loss, I cause someone else a loss. So we'll see how this actually works in halacha. Schir yom, we'll say what happens if you're rented out for the day. Afilu be'ir acheres lo yasa. So it's very interesting. Let's say I'm a day laborer. So I go ahead and I'm a day laborer and I agree to work for Shimon, right, in another city for the day. And then chas v'shalom, I become an avel. What's the halacha? I don't show up for work. Then I will say, now why is this? I'm not causing Shimon a loss. So I will say, it's common for day laborers to cancel. Right? It's common. So because it's common, everybody understands that particular risk. Look at Rashi. Schir yom, echad, afilu be'ir acheres, ein yodin shu sham aval, ve'ein yodin sham shu avel, ve'leka mishum marasayin lo yasa, hoil u'biad al-achser. See, the most is very interesting. Day laborers always have the right to renege on their employment. Why not? Because you will say, if you don't have the right to renege on your employment, you're not called a day laborer. What are you called? a slave, right? An eved, right? And there's no such thing as avdos. So because it is normal that a day laborer always has the right to renege, therefore, again, even though I may be causing someone else a loss, and we've seen that in cases where you cause someone else a loss, you really should try to abstain from doing so. Halacha lamaisa, because it's normal and it's built in that day laborers can renege. If a person's in avelos, they should renege on that arrangement. Haisa melachas achirim biado. So I will say, let's say somebody contracted me to do work. So let's say again, I'm a potter, right? I'm a potter, and I'm making a jug for someone, and that malacha is in my hands, right? So I'm making it. Afapi shebikiboles lo yaseh. Even though I'm a kablon, I will say now a kablon essentially is what? Like a contractor, right? The job is mine. I still shouldn't do it. So the Gemara says, "Avabi shebikiboles." I will say, if I'm a contractor, that makes it worse. Why? Because a contractor is viewed as what? As self-employed. Whatever malach I'm doing for myself. Of course I can't do that over the course of Avelis. Ella, ema, bein bikiboles, bein b'she'ina bikiboles lo yaseh. Rather, I will say what it means is like this. If I contracted to do work for someone, this is a metaltal, a movable property, and let's say the object is in my house, I'm working on it, whether I'm a kablon, which means like a contractor, or not a kablon, I should not do the work over the course of avelos. That's the idea. I will say, what happens if someone else is doing work for me? And now chas v'shalom again, the person, right, someone, and I become an avel. What's the halacha? The beis solo yasa. If the work is being done for me in my home, I should not have it done over the course of avelos. But if the work is being done in someone else's home, then yasu, that's fine, it can be done. So we'll say, so again, we'll end off with this story. So again, what you begin to see is as follows. What you begin to see is that halacha l'maisa, an avel can't, well, we'll see what the halacha l'maisa is. But what it sounds like over here is that, so far, is that an avel is not permitted to do malacha on over the course of his avelos. He can't even do malacha for the sake of a davar ha'avid, for the sake of a loss. Perhaps the exception to that rule is what? If there's a loss, a davar ha'avid, and he could do the work b'tzina, like Shimon Gamliel said. B'tzina, right? Maybe he could do that. We've also begun to see that halacha l'maisa, where the avel is doing work that impacts other people. Well, again, I should say differently. If the avel serves a need for the public, then ultimately, again, he could do the malacha, because again, the needs of the public outweigh the needs of the individual. If the avel is contracted to do work for someone else, and his failure to show up is going to go ahead and cost someone else a loss, he's permitted to do the malacha. If he's contracted out as a schir yom, a day laborer, he's not permitted to do the malacha, he's obligated to cancel, even though that might cost someone a loss. Why? Because it's common for a schir yom, for day laborers, to renege. Good. So we'll say, now let's end off with this last story. So the Gemara says as follows. Furthermore, again, one last piece. If there's someone doing work for you, can they continue during your avelos? If it's being done in your house, no. If it's being done in the worker's house, yes. Last case, with this we'll conclude. Merion, Berei de Ravin, Umar, Berei de Rav Acha, Berei de Rava. So I'll say Merion, the son of Ravin, and Mar, the son of Rav Acha, the son of Rava. Havuluhu, Hahu Gamlo de Tura Bahadi Adadi. They had a partnership, right? They had two oxen. They shared a yoke, right? They each had an ox. Right, they put their two oxen in the yoke together, and they had a shared field that they were plowing. Isra be'milsa b'mar berei derav acha berei derava. So we'll say Mar became an aval. Right, he lost one of the close relatives, and what did he do? Upaske lagamle. So he took his ox out of the yoke. Right, he took his ox out of the yoke, figuring I'm an avelos now, so my ox can't go ahead and do malacha. Rav Ashi said, Gavra Rabba Kemar Bereit Rav Acha, Ovid Hachi. So Rav Ashi says to Mar, how could this be? A great man like Mar Bereit Rav Acha, how could he do such a thing? While I understand that Mar is not concerned about his loss, but here's the problem, which is what? He's in a partnership with Marion, right? And again, if Mar removes his ox, then Marion can't plow the field either, which means he's causing someone else a loss. And what did we learn when it comes to causing someone else? But say, what did we learn? We learned that if I'm a donkey driver and I'm hired out to someone else, During Avelos, I can go out and continue my work because I can't cause someone else a loss. So how could Mar pull his ox out of the yoke when he's going to cause Marion a loss? The Gemara says, "Who savar?" Mar's svara was Adam Chashuv Shiny. An important person is different. And maybe because everyone knew that this was Mar's ox, everyone knew it was his ox, if they saw it doing work over the course of Mar's Avelos, they may erroneously think that an Avel is permitted to do malacha. In other words, people don't know the circumstances behind all these different situations. They might have erroneously thought that malacha is mutter during Avelos. Therefore, Mar felt, because he's an Adam Chashuv, it was appropriate for him to go ahead and pull out his ox. So we'll say in Yirtz Hashem tomorrow, we'll see whether or not Mar was correct. Shkayach, everyone. We'll stop here.